technically I get fired twice in this video, but both times with context. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is... I still don't know what it's called, honestly. I filmed the first one of these. It hasn't even been put up yet. I haven't figured out a title for what this series actually is, but it's basically a history of me, in some way. I don't think I'm calling it that. That's way too abstract, but it's a history of me. And so this is the second video in the series. I'll have a link to the first one down below. There will be at least 2 more as of right now, before I wait for time to naturally catch up, and then I could do a 5th one. But right now, this is a history of me part 2, not the actual working title. Where we left off at the end of the last video is just a very quick recap of everything. Talked about my childhood, talked about all the various aspects of things I engaged with my childhood, the games I kind of dabbled in loosely, not a real gaming background in history, but occasional stuff. Then from there, fast forwarding through my education, my school, where I went, all of those things, to eventually when I met my wife, when I started dating. And when we left off, I packed my bags and we moved to Cleveland. I had basically just graduated. I was dating my wife. We had gotten engaged, and she was in middle school in Cleveland, and I was just graduated, so I wasn't leaving work and I wasn't leaving a job. And so we planned everything around the fact that I was going to start off we were going to start off our life together in Cleveland. And so we got on the road and we traveled to Cleveland. And then 2 weeks later, we got married. That's basically it. 2 weeks later, we got married. 2 weeks later, roughly, after we arrived in Cleveland, we went ahead and got married. Our entire engagement, this is the end of the last video, you can check this out. We dated for 4 weeks before we got engaged. We dated for 2 weeks before we decided to get engaged. We gave ourselves another 2 weeks so we weren't crazy. There's more context than the last video, but it's basically just a cultural thing. And then from there, we were engaged for 3 months, and we got married. 3 or 4 months, and we got married. And so we're in Cleveland now, and now the next question is, what do I do next? I need a job. I'm going to sneeze. There's going to be a cut here. Honestly, I'm surprised I don't have to sneeze more often on camera. That was zero. Anyways, so I have to figure out what I'm doing as far as work. I have to get a job. And the day my wife's currently in school, she has I don't recall if she had a side job yet. I don't believe so. I believe we were operating on 0 income. I believe. It's going back a while. It's going back 11 years trying to think through things. I didn't take notes at the time. I didn't really have a plan of eventually doing a history of everything. But I needed a job because I was walking into our marriage, we were walking into our marriage with some savings, but not enough to live forever, just enough to give us breathing room while we figured out what to do next. So I started looking around, started interviewing. Eventually I got a job packing boxes in a warehouse. Food and medical distribution center, and I got a job packing boxes. The problem is, the person who hired me didn't realize that they would have to fire me very shortly as soon as they realized that I didn't have paperwork. It was a very unofficial hiring. It was like we met, we discussed, they gave me the job, I started working, and then at 2 months in, they had to fire me because I was not a legal worker. I was getting paid, all that stuff had all worked out, everything was all fine, but for some reason they had missed the part where I didn't have any legal documents to work in the US. I was a Canadian citizen, and I had come to the US, and you have to get paperwork to work in the US. So I basically worked there for like 3 months, before they kind of realized their lawyer or whoever was like, by the way, this is a problem. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. And so they called me in and they're like, hey Alex, we like you. You're doing good work packing boxes. That's packing boxes. It wasn't anything crazy. But they basically said, hey, we're going to let you go. We're going to let you go. But your job is still here, assuming you get your paperwork within a reasonable time frame. More than that, they actually wanted me to take a course on networking, on like computer networking and stuff, not like person-to-person networking, but computer networking and things. And so I took a course for them. Never actually became relevant because when I eventually did get rehired, and I did get rehired, that wasn't relevant anymore. They had hired someone for that position. So I gathered some skills on something that I've never used to this day in terms of just computer stuff. I use a lot of computer stuff, but that stuff, nothing at all. But so eventually, 3 months later, I got my paperwork and got rehired, basically. They kept my job. I got to go back and pack more boxes. But it turned into something more, so there's relevance there. But along the way, while we're getting our paperwork, while we're getting all our green card stuff, we got pregnant along this pathway, and our agent, whoever gave us the interview for a green card, they were actually the first person to find out we're pregnant, because they go through the whole aspect of like, is this a real marriage, or did you just marry him to give him a green card? And the answer is yes, we just got married so I can get a green card, but then we fell in love and decided to stay married. Well, not actually, but we were really married, and so we told him, hey, by the way, you're the first person we're telling, but we are officially pregnant. No one else knows. Please don't tell anyone. But this is a real marriage, and we're together because we love each other, and all those nice things. And so, got my green card, went back to work, and continued packing boxes. At that point, somewhere along the way, I don't remember exactly how long, but I believe I worked there for around 8 months or so. This is 2011 we got married, 2011 I got the job, 2010 we got married, 2011 was when I was already in the job, ready for a bit, and I started getting promoted, sort of, meaning effectively I was packing boxes for a long time, but I was doing more stuff on the side. I was always trying to find ways to do more things, which is very relevant because that's why I got promoted. The person who purchased, like I said already, was a medical and food distribution company. The person who did the main purchasing for medical, if I recall correctly, I think it was medical and then moved into food. That's what it was. The person who did the main purchasing for medical, they were stepping down from what they were doing, and I stepped up. They gave me the opportunity to step up into the role. At that point, they had a software they used for purchasing that was written by somebody who had worked at the company like 8 years ago. No one knew how it worked. It kind of just generated numbers, and no one really understood what happened, and no one liked the numbers it generated. So it's kind of used as a starting point, and then completely overruled by manual data entry left, right, and center. And I didn't like not knowing why a system operated the way it did, and so I started learning how to code for the sake of being able to write something different. And I started using that system on my own separate system as far as how to generate orders and whatnot. I started learning how to code and using that towards this. And it started off as very, very patchy back of the office, just a way to get my own numbers out of the system. And eventually it turned into something that they started using. And then I got promoted to general purchaser. The food purchaser was leaving. They just put me in charge of both. The system I was doing was actually much more efficient than what we were doing until now. So I was actually able to do the jobs of both people while still having extra time to continue to code more and more other things. Basically, a whole lot of manual labor was eliminated by me putting this together. And so I was able to do a lot more, be promoted within the company, and just started to really, really grow within the company. It's at this point that the stories of the history of me, terrible title, it's at this point that the stories start to diverge. Because now we have 3 stories at this point. Because now we have my career path, which has been my career path until now. We then have my interest in board games, and we're shortly going to have my interest in board games as a side business. Because at this point, right about now, 2011, I got introduced to Stone Age. My brother-in-law came home from college. He was in college separately. He came home, and he introduced my wife and I to a game called Stone Age, which we played. We had both played. All of us had played Catan before. We enjoyed Catan. It was a good game, but he taught us Stone Age, and we really liked Stone Age. I was really compelled by this worker placement dice rolling game that seemed to be the same fun I got out of Catan, but in a very different engine. I really liked it, and I was like, "This is incredible. This is a great game. I've never heard of this." Fast forward 3 months, and he comes home with Small World from Days of Wonder. And again, I really liked it. I was like, these are some solid games. I don't know what's happening here, but we have Catan that I've known about for 7 years, 10 years, whatever it's been. We have Carcassonne that I knew about. But Stone Age and Small World, within a period of 3 months, found 2 new games that I'd never heard about and were amazing. And so I started to look into the hobby. I started to Google. And fast forward a month, and my wife and I found, well, so let's take a step back. I started to Google, I found all these things, I found Small World, I found all the expansions of Small World, I filled a cart at CSI, Cool Stuff Inc. I filled a cart with around $170 worth of Small World, everything. I was like, I can't justify that right now. I mean, I was crazy from the get-go, but I wasn't that crazy, yeah. And so I didn't buy anything. But I started looking, and I started realizing there's an entire world of board games out there that I hadn't experienced, had never heard of, and anything. This Stone Age and Small World were my introduction to this. And then fast forward about a month, and at a local school auction, my wife and I won. We won a PS3. A PS3 and a bunch of video games. I was always a PC game player. I had a PC. I bought games from Steam or wherever. I didn't have any need for a PS3. And so I sold the PS3. My wife didn't have an interest either, just to be clear. Both of us have no interest in that. So we sold the PS3 on eBay. We got $270, which will tell you how old the story is, because a PS3 of $270 is not something you see nowadays. And we put that money towards board games. We bought a bunch of games. I don't remember everything, but I remember that we got all the Small World stuff. We got Stone Age. I did not get the Stone Age expansion. I don't even know if it was out yet or if it was out of print. I don't remember, but we didn't get a Stone Age expansion. We got Seven Wonders. We got Castle Burgundy. We got Sentinels of the Multiverse. We got Dungeon Run. I think I got Jaipur. I have to double check the list. I have some purchase list of some tracking record of what I actually purchased back in the day. Got Jambo, not Jaipur. There were like 10 games or so that were my first purchase ever of games. From 3 different stores, from Miniature Market, from Cool Stuff Inc., and from eBay. 3 separate purchases for the $270 we had just sold our PS3 for. And the only 2 games left from those games are Seven Wonders and Castle Burgundy. Technically Jambo too. I got Jambo back recently because my wife wanted it. That's why they're on the table, by the way. I don't have Stone Age or Small World anymore. Those were both great games, but I've moved past them. They're both excellent gateway games. So is Seven Wonders, by the way, but Seven Wonders I keep. There's always a time to play Seven Wonders. But anyways, I started getting into the hobby, getting sucked heavily into the hobby. It's at this point that I started buying games from anywhere and everywhere. The initial purchase, that $270, that fueled the initial dive in. We started playing. We got Pandemic. Pandemic lasted for a long time. It was the third last title to eventually leave. My wife and I, we sat down. I think Pandemic was one of the first games we dove into. I remember sitting on the floor of our house. I think it was our house. It wasn't our apartment. We had moved from an apartment to a house by this point because we were in our apartment for a year. But that year consisted of 3 months of my first job, followed by like 3 months of not working, followed by like 8 months. By the time I found board games, by the time I got into the hobby, we had already moved to a house. Our first year together was an apartment, then we moved to a house, and we're sitting on the floor of our house, just playing Pandemic on the floor, on the carpet. That's what we did for nights on end. We just enjoyed that game. It's just so much fun to cooperatively tackle the world, saving it from a pandemic. Such an abstract concept that would never, ever, ever become more real in any way, shape, or form until it actually did. And so I started diving further down to the hobby. There was no such thing as enough games. I started looking around. There's a store, One-Eyed Jock, in Virginia, I want to say. And they don't operate the same way they used to back when I found them. But I found them on eBay, and they became the main place I spent money on games. There were other places. There were Board Game Geek auctions. There was still eBay. I made the occasional purchase from Miniature Market, from Cool Stuff Inc., from wherever. Those are the main two sites I purchased from back in the day. This is before Game Nerds was a thing, or before Game Nerds had an online store. Game Nerds has since become one of my main places that I purchase games. It's now Game Stuff. It's now Game Nerds and Miniature Market. Miniature Market has lasted the entire time. Cool Stuff Inc. infrequently at best. But the main place for a long time that I purchased a lot of games was One-Eyed Jock. One-Eyed Jock, OEJ, they ran auctions on eBay for ding and dent games. So you basically could get a $40 game for $25, basically. And for the price you had to pay for that was that the corner was dented or had a rip. The dings would vary. You'd have some that were like genuine gashes through the game, and those were unfortunate. Or you'd have some that was like the tiniest of a corner dent. Enough so that a store couldn't sell them. One-Eyed Jock had a relationship with these distributors who would sell them ding and dent pallets. I'd go in there and I'd buy all the games I wanted, most of them coming with some form of damage that is minimal to none, and some of them coming with reasonable damage, but still saving tons of money while buying a lot of games. It was just the best way to get everything I wanted to at a reasonable price point while having tons of access to new stuff I was interested in, and I was researching things daily. I was watching content creation on a daily basis. This is about when I found out about the Dice Tower, started watching them. I was watching anything and everything I could get my hands on. Again, a reference point for context to tell you how deep into the hobby I was, is I remember taking baths while just putting up my phone and just watching Dice Tower videos. Why? Because there's more opportunity and more time to sit down and watch a Dice Tower video to relax, some bubbles, and some board games. Bubbles and board games. That'd be a great name for a YouTube channel. Probably not the best video, but a great name for the channel. I was heavily into the hobby. But remember, because, like I said already, this is where the story has two paths. We're going to get to 3 soon, but 2 paths. I now have my interest in board games, my interest in the hobby, but I'm still at my company. Along this process, this month-long, 6-7 month-long process, I think it was somewhere around there, but probably more than that. It was probably around 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months of getting involved in the hobby and buying board games. I'm still growing at my company. I'm still building them more systems, more tools. I've been at my company for a year and a half, maybe 2 years now, and I'm just, it's a good job. It's a good job. I'm purchasing games. I'm purchasing games, and I'm purchasing food and medical supplies. Completely different systems. But I also start using my programming knowledge to build a system to manage my own collection, to manage what I'm spending money on, what I'm selling it, to track all that stuff. But selling is not a big part of it, because along these 6 to 8 months, my collection grows from 10 games on our initial purchase, 10-ish, 13-ish, whatever it was, to around 400 games. And I realize I have a problem. I realized it 7 months back, but I realize I have a problem. And so what I start doing is I start looking into trading on Board Game Geek. Trading, getting rid of games that I played, I can't even remember, I'm trying to remember the games that I first traded away. Like some of my first trades, I don't remember what they were. I may have tried going through some of my older games that I owned. There was one that starts with a Y, is it YS? YS, like yes? Yisafon. Yisafon was one of the first games I traded away. It was a game that I played with my wife and I enjoyed it, I liked it, but I got rid of it because I think it's from Astari Games, which I don't even know if they're a thing anymore. But I traded away Yusufan because it was a good game, but it wasn't for me. I started looking into trading on Board Game Geek as an opportunity. How can I continue to get the games while spending less money? Because I'm currently spending like $500 a month, and it's not sustainable. I have 400 games. I mean, it is sustainable. We had enough extra money to do that, but not enough so that that was a good decision. It was not a good decision. For a month or two, sure. On an ongoing, frequent basis, no. We were not at a point in our lives where in any way that was a reasonable decision to continue doing that. And so I started looking into trading on Board Game Geek. And trading was really hard. If you put 1 or 2 games up for trade, and other people put 1 or 2 games up for trade, trying to find someone who's interested in the game you want, you're interested in the game they want, and you're all mutually beneficial arrangements, it's hard. And then a lot of people would say things like, I'm not interested in doing small trades, I only do larger trades because it saves on shipping. And I was like, that sounds reasonable, honestly, but I'm only trading the games I've played. More importantly, I'm only trading the games I've played that aren't for me. So from these 400 games I had, I played maybe 100 of them, and I was willing to let go of like 10 of them. And so there's a handful of games. Finding that overlap just became very, very hard, until one day I had an epiphany. It was a very nervous and very scary epiphany, but it was an epiphany all the same. I decided that in the interest of trying to get more games without spending money or spending less money, I would open up every single one of those 300 games that I hadn't played yet. I would take every single one of them and I'd mark it as being for trade on Board Game Geek. Because if I'm trading 300 games instead of 7 games, and if I go ahead and mark every single game I have an interest in, which was basically every decently rated game that existed, then that would be a lot of overlap. And suddenly I could start trading with all these people who didn't want to do smaller trades. Suddenly I'd have more people who wanted the things I wanted. I'm getting rid of games that I own, that are my games, that I haven't played yet, and that's felt bad. It felt bad to do so, but it was something I was willing to try and gamble to see if it would work. Because, hey, maybe I can trade more. Ultimately, I'm just giving up something I haven't played for something else I haven't played. What's the big deal once you factor in shipping costs and all that? And this is where I kind of discovered that there was a demand that wasn't being fulfilled. Because trades started pouring in. In the past, I had always messaged others. I wanted to trade a game. I'd go hunt down 15 people who wanted that game and try to initiate messages and conversations and trade. I would desperately try to trade and have most of my outreach either ignored entirely or rejected. But as soon as I did what I just told you, marking all my games available for trade and saying I want these games, suddenly people just started messaging me. Left, right, and center, all the people who I had been that person for them, they were now that person to me. I had 300 unplayed popular games that people wanted to get their hands on, and they were now messaging me. They were having conversations with me. And I had a lot of overlap with them because I wanted basically everything, and I was offering up stuff that not just stuff that I was getting rid of, which would be 7 games or something like that, but everything. And there was a ton of overlap. And what started as an option to just open up the door to get more trades quickly became an option where I realized there was a business possibility here. That there was a demand that wasn't being fulfilled for these larger trades, for this larger bartering of goods. And this is where the story path diverges again into now I have my day job, board games as a hobby, and board games as a business. I start trading games en masse. Like en masse. Over the next few months, I spend basically $0 on board games, and I spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month on shipping. And my basement explodes. It was my basement. It's always been my basement. Everything from where I stored games to where I film games now, it's always been my basement. Different houses, but my basement. My unplayed games, my collection, not my unplayed games, my collection explodes. I go from 400 games to like 700 games within 2 months. It's absolutely insane what happens, and I realize this is great. I'm getting a ton of games, but now I'm on a new problem. Because of shipping, I'm spending just as much, if not more, than I was before. I'm getting more games for it at a cheaper price point, but I'm spending just as much, if not more, than I was before in a matter of months. And again, because factor in, I spent basically the same much, but I got like 300 more games in 2 months instead of over 6 to 8 months. So I'm spending more per month while getting better deals and more games out of it. It's a problem. And so I realized the only practical solution is to start selling some of the games. Because remember, this is not about a business. This is about me just trying to get my hands on games at a more reasonable price point, at a cheaper price point. And so I realized I have to start selling some of these games. And so I open up the floodgates again, and I start my very first Board Game Geek auction, which you can probably find somewhere. I didn't delete anything, so it's there somewhere. If you go to Alex SR on Board Game Geek, it's not my active profile. I use Board Game Co. as my active profile, but Alex SR, ALEXSR, is my original Board Game Geek profile that I haven't checked in years. I don't know how many messages I have on there. I probably should check, because I probably have people who think that I'm ignoring them, but I'm not actually ignoring them. But my first auction on that account is me selling 400 games, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong. and it's putting up for sale almost everything I have that I haven't played, with minimum bids in place so I don't lose money and all that. But the goal was to sell some of these games I've been getting to pay for the shipping, because my wife is being incredibly supportive left, right, and center, but I feel bad that I'm spending this much money on my hobby. And turns out I actually make money. For the first time ever, my spreadsheet of tracking what I spent and what I had, all that goes to the green. I suddenly find that I have now gotten enough. I sell hundreds of games. I have to go through the process of shipping it and packing it. We're not talking about the labor factor. We were not in any way talking about the labor and all the costs there. But for the first time, my spreadsheet goes to the green, goes to the black. You never actually go to the green. You're in the red and then you're in the black. That's the terminology. But it goes to the black, and I am suddenly cash positive. And I'm suddenly blown away. And I realize I have something in my hands that I didn't really intend on, but is something that is worth pursuing. And over the next year, I continue to try to build this out as a business. I have a basement that starts to grow from 700 games. I dips down to like 600 after I sell 200 games, and then it starts growing and growing all the way up until I get to the point where I have 1,500 games in my basement on steel racks, like little wire rack shelving with the cardboard boxes to make sure the games don't get dented from the steel racking, and then just racks and racks. My entire basement is basically just a little miniature warehouse of me walking up aisles of shelving to be able to grab games and sell them and trade them and all this stuff as I try to build an actual business for my basement. Not without drama. The downside of doing a business on your own as opposed to having an actual like warehouse and employees and taxes and accountants and all those things, the downside is not everyone likes the fact that you're running a business. Understandably. Illogically and irrationally, but understandably. People don't always like that. They're like, well, why should I trade you games when you're making a profit on this? Why are you making money off of me? As a business, we all kind of understand it. Well, you know, you have to make money as a business, so of course I give you money. It's still something, I've talked about this in channel in general, people still have a problem with the concept of profit, but at least there's some recognition that a business can profit. An individual, it's always messier. Why should you be profiting off of me? If you're profiting off of me, I'm losing. Well, not necessarily. Either they're offering a deal that you want, and you're both winning, or you're not, and then just don't engage in that deal. It is what it is. But there's always some degree of resentment around the fact that I existed. Not a large, but there was always within... Again, you can find drama if you search for Alex SR or something. There were times I engaged in math trades at a point. I engaged in auctions. And as it became clear that I was a business, some people didn't like the fact that I engaged in math trades or auctions. Why are you inserting yourself into what should be a user-populated domain and you're trying to make money off everyone? And so I stepped back. I think it's irrational. I think it's illogical. But I stepped back from math trades and auctions where there were quote-unquote unwilling participants in those exchanges. A math trade, by its very nature, is that you get paired up with people, and someone could get paired up with me without wanting to have been paired up with me. And I thought it was irrational, I thought it was illogical, but I didn't want to step on toes if I could avoid it, and so I pulled back from auctions or math trades where the other person wasn't choosing to engage. I continued trading and selling. You can either buy my game or trade with me, that's your choice, but I stopped engaging in where you didn't have as much agency over it. And so... drama continued to ensue here and there, not excessively. There were always a large amount of people who enjoyed what I was offering because, again, I was filling a void. At the end of the day, I was filling a void in my basement. I was sitting here, and people were flocking to me because no one else was offering this. And so there were people who were flocking to me and appreciating what I was doing, and then there were people who would come to me and then be resentful that I existed. Most on the appreciating, but always some on the resentful side. But that's kind of what was happening. It's at this point, back to my... Let's talk about my love of games for a second. Back to my gaming interests. I was only ever playing games with my wife at this time. Everything was two-player. Every game. I remember getting my hands on Cyclades and getting my hands on Cosmic Encounter and never playing them for years because they weren't two-player games. I was getting them because I loved board games and I wanted the excuse to have them, but I wasn't actually playing them. Other games too. Those two just stick in my head as two games that I really wanted to play, but I never got tabled. At least, never is not true. I got tabled eventually, but not while I was playing games two-player. Going back to my day job, this is where things started to fall apart. I got promoted at my day job again, but I got promoted to management. I was managing others beneath me, and I didn't like that. I wasn't good at it, frankly. Now it's a different story today, but back then I was not good at managing others. And I kind of just expected that if you were working underneath me, you should do what you're supposed to do. And if you don't, why aren't you? That was the extent of my management. You should do this. Well, they're not good at it. Well, then you should be good at it. It wasn't management so much as just hoping that the person beneath you does what they're supposed to do, which kind of eliminates the point of me existing if that's the case. And so it became a less rewarding job that I was getting less job satisfaction from. I was getting frustrated with. My employers were getting frustrated with because I wasn't a good manager. And so I went from being an excellent employee in some capacity to being promoted to being a mediocre / employee I guess mediocre and are the same, so no need for the slash there. And it wasn't as much of a good fit. And at one point, fast forward 3-4 months to this, I met with my boss. He asked me how things were going. And I said, honestly, I'm incredibly grateful for the past 3 years. This has been a great place for me. But I'm at the point now where I think if I got offered less money elsewhere, I'd probably take it because I don't think it's a fit anymore. And he said, I agree, and fired me. So, I mean, I'm fine with that. We parted on good terms, to be very clear. They did not contest unemployment. I've continued working with them after. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but over the next years, I continued working with them. But they fired me at this point. And this is where we kind of have to backtrack. So let's finish this part. So they fired me. We parted ways. I started the process of looking for other opportunities, but I'm still running this Board Game Co. thing on the side. Now we have to rewind a few months now because I forgot about one important part of the story here, which is where I met a person named Dan in the community. Dan played games. I played games. Other people had told me, hey, you should meet Dan, he plays games. Other people told Dan, hey, you should meet Alex, he plays games. And both of us did what we've always done, which was we kind of wrote it off as, okay. Meaning, I don't know about you. I don't know what your experience has been like, but my experience has always been that if somebody plays, even so much as Catan, people look at me and they're like, wow, you have so many games. You should meet Joe. Joe plays Catan. And I'm like, sure, but Joe plays Catan and I play all of this. It doesn't mean we can't be friends. We can be friends, but stop trying to pair us up just because he has one game and I have all of these. It's not the same thing necessarily. So Dan and I have been hearing about each other from other common associates, common friends, over a several-month period. And eventually one day he decides to stop by, he knocks on my door, he walks into my basement, and he's like, oh, you actually like games. Again, not trying to gatekeep, not trying to separate, but we both had massive collections and an obsessive passion with the hobby, and we were used to other people thinking that meant we would just talk with anyone who liked Monopoly. And so he walked in my basement, we had a long conversation, and we started connecting more often. We started having the occasional game night. This is when for the first time, this is before I left my job, in 2013, for the first time, I started a weekly dedicated game night between myself and Dan, and kind of commonly inviting our mutual friends. Like, hey, you can come if you want, no pressure. They didn't play games, but hey, you can come. And that's when we started having a regular Thursday night game night that continued every single Thursday night until COVID and the pandemic shut the world down. I missed maybe once or twice a year, I'd miss a game night because of something that was a conflict. But every single Thursday night for a very, very, very long time, from 2013 through 2019, through 6 years long, we had consistent game nights every single Thursday. Because for months, Dan and I would dabble in trying to get a game played here. We'd play Tennis Trail, we played Carson City, we'd play Zia Legends of a Drift System, we played, what else did we play? Kemet. There were a bunch of games we got tabled here and there that we managed to finally find ways to play games that are more than just two players. He was playing with his wife, I was playing with my wife. We managed to find ways to actually table stuff with more than just the two of us. But in 2013, we finally started a weekly game night, and that continued up until the point when in 2014, I got fired from my job because of the slow-growing discrepancy. And then in 2014, after talking to a whole bunch of people, including Dan, two things happened. After I got fired, a few things happened. I reached out to everyone. I started a conversation with Dan about taking this business that was in my basement, this board game business, and moving it to an actual warehouse. You see, Dan owned warehouses in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had a conversation with him about trying to move my business there, trying to grow it. I was bursting at the seams in my house. It was a limit of what we can do. And so I was like, hey, I just got fired. I have more time. I have more energy. Let's try to make this a real thing. And Dan and I partnered up, and we went on a road trip and drove every single game, all 1,500 games in a U-Haul, down to a warehouse in North Carolina, where we have been operating ever since. And then, from the people I reached out to, 5, 6, 10 people, I don't remember, everyone, I reached out to all my contacts I could as far as looking for a job, because Board Game Co., that side hustle there, was nice, it was great, but you can't support a family of, I want to say we were a family of 4 back then. It was 2 adults, 2 kids. Yeah, it was a family of 4. It was a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 kids, we had a newborn, and you can't support a family of 4 on like $1,500 a month. And so, it was still a side hustle, it was still something I was trying to grow, but I kept looking for a job, and then, in 2014, someone offered me a job. Someone who I had met at my last job by sitting down and playing Kamisado with them. They had come in at my last job to discuss potentially doing a software implementation for my old company. They had seen me, they saw the game on the table, I had Kamisado set up on the table. For some reason, not the setup, I had the game box on the table, and they said, what's that? And we had found a closed office, and we had sat down, we had played Kamisado, and when he found out I was looking, he was like, I remember that guy. I remember sitting down playing games with him, and so he offered me a job. And so in 2014, I started working for another company where I proceeded to stay until, well, I don't know, 2 months ago, when I finally started doing content creation full time. And that's part 2 of everything. Just journey, pathway from starting my jobs, starting my involvement in board games, starting my involvement in the board game hobby as a well as a business, and starting the next chapter of my life. We'll be back in a few weeks with the next chapter, where I go into, well, the continuation of Board Game Co., how that turned out, where we leave off and how that started in content creation, the continuation of my next job, and all of that stuff. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Thanks for being here, and as always, have a good one.